Welcome back to yet another episode of the Colours of Parenthood. In today's episode, we'll delve into a conversation that touches on the resilience, strength, and incredible capacity of love that exists within the realm of single parenthood. Our guest today, Hannah, is someone who has not only explored this journey professionally, but has also lived it personally. She helps parents build a nurturing environment for their precious little ones, ensuring they thrive despite the complex dynamic that come with parents living apart. So, grab a cup of your favorite brew, find a cozy spot, and join us today as we dive into enriching conversation. Hello, everyone. Today we have Hannah with us. Hannah, it's so nice to have you here. Could you please share a bit about yourself and your story into how you became a parent?
Hello, thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here. So, my name is Hannah Strong. I am a mother of two wonderful children. I have a boy and a girl. I am a divorced mum and I'm also a therapist. I had my children fairly young, my first child when I was 26, and we were married. We were married when I was 23. We continued to be married for another few years, and we then decided to get divorced. And my parenthood and my parent journey has really been shaped by that decision and the decisions I took following the divorce and during the divorce, actually.
Okay, and could you please share a bit more about what was it like to transition from being a mom, having the support, and to become a divorced parent?
I think every divorce journey is different. And usually, one of the things that people have in common is that the relationship is kind of slowly degrading leading up to the divorce. So, for me personally, it didn't feel like a huge weight was suddenly added on, that I was then going it alone in terms of parenting responsibilities. I was co parenting as well. I still am co parenting. For me, the hugest thing and the biggest sense of anxiety I had was, how am I going to make my children okay in all of this? And I think as a therapist, I was overwhelmingly aware of all of the studies linking children who have divorced parents to them having a lower quality of well-being. And I was so determined for that to not be my children's story and for them to not be one of those statistics. And it was that anxiety that, to begin with, consumed me, but also drove me on the parenting journey that I've been on now in ensuring that that isn't their story.
Okay, so now it's like a bit of like your purpose.
Yeah, totally. I feel like yeah, maybe not even shaped my parenting journey, but it shaped my career and it shaped my life. So I
Mhm.
now specialize in working with parents who are divorcing or have divorced and want to ensure that their children don't just survive it, but they actually thrive through it. So I've shaped my whole therapeutic career around it too. And I'm deeply, deeply passionate about children of divorce and that they are able to have a life that they can thrive,
Mm.
because it's so possible. And parents care so deeply and they want that so badly for their children, just as I did. But the magic for me was when I brought that care together with the knowledge of what children actually need to be able to thrive. That's what enabled them to be able to thrive. So I'm really passionate about all these caring parents getting all of the knowledge that they need in order for that to be their children's story too.
Mhm. Great. And would you say now, when this is your purpose and you basically your career is mainly focused on
Mm.
helping parents that have been through divorce how to parent their children, would you say that they're saying to you, like, yes, that's what I needed? Like, I was searching for it, but I couldn't find it before, for instance?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I'm quite shocked by the lack of guidance there is out there. There's a basic guidance in terms of don't argue in front of your children, make child-centered decisions and that kind of thing. But actually, from a child-centered point of view, what does my child actually need? For example, we can talk about attachment quite a lot in therapy. So our child feeling securely attached to us as their caregiver has a huge impact on their mental and emotional well-being in childhood and in adulthood. And divorce is a huge thing which rocks attachment, because what children essentially see is, let's say mum and dad, they're two caregivers who were attached and they believed what attaching mum and dad was love. So love's attaching mum and dad. Oh, and now they've become unattached. But wait a minute. What's attaching me to mum and me to dad is also love. So if that love can break, can this love break? And it isn't always a conscious question. In fact, it's very often a subconscious question. But addressing that subconscious question in our children's mind is absolutely life-changing for them in terms of their attachment, because actually understanding that this love between mum and dad is different to the love between mum and I or dad and I is completely different, means our children remain secure in that attachment, and they know that yes, mum and dad can split, they can separate, they can leave each other, but they will never leave me, and therefore I'm still secure. And a secure child is a child that can thrive.
Yep. I'm curious to ask also, with your clients, for instance, is there a huge difference when it comes to attachment and being divorced in a different stage in your children's life? For instance, if they're teenagers or if they're like toddlers or infants?
So I think whenever you get divorced, there's always a grief process that your child has to go through, whether they are 6 months old and aren't aware of it, or whether they're teenagers and fully comprehend everything that's going
Hmm.
on. And the grief process just looks different. And this can, part of the grief process is them figuring out their attachment. Okay, well, what does mum and dad splitting actually mean for my attachment to them and my attachment to others, and what my attachment might be to someone else when I'm grown up? The difference I see in the age categories is, if you have a very young child or a toddler and they're not really aware of all of the dynamics and what's actually happening, they will continue to try and piece together your divorce as they grow and as their comprehension of the world grows. So if you split up when they're 6 months old, and then they start to go to school and they start to mix with people whose parents are together, and they're like, oh, that's different to how I've got it. Okay, why is that? Okay. And they're always asking why? Let me connect those dots. Let me connect what's the same between me and others. Let me connect what's different. Let me ask why that is. And they're just connecting, and they're figuring out a picture of the world and where they sit within that and how the world works. And I think no matter what age our children are, they have the same questions, but it's just potentially won't necessarily be asked, obviously when they're like 6 months old. But eventually, they, at some point in that journey, they're going to be asking those questions. When they're a teenager, they might be asking them all at once. If they're younger, it might be kind of a gradual grief process, a gradual grieving, maybe a life that they felt they never had, of growing up in a household where mum and dad were together. So that's the main differentiation for me that comes up.
And how old were your children when you got divorced?
They were 1 and 2, so young.
Really young.
Mm.
And would you say that you experienced those questions when they got older?
Yeah, I've definitely experienced those questions. Although what I've tried to do, because I understand what those questions will be and the rough developmental age that they will start to comprehend those things, I've tried to put into place, whether it's through story or through play, or as they've got older, just through normal conversation, back and forth conversation, I've tried to connect those dots in their mind before they decide to connect them with something else that I don't have control or power over. So, for example, when we were talking about attachment, I knew that when they come to comprehend, oh, okay, so mum and dad splitting, what was holding them together was love, and what's holding me to them is love. I knew that would be a question. So I I wrote a book about it, and I'd read them stories about it, and we'd talk in play about it, and we'd talk about different kinds of love, and we'd bring it into daily life. And we'd just be like, oh, look, oh yeah, what kind of love have they got if it's just someone on the TV? So it's just woven in as this very normal part of life that we talk about. It's normalized, I guess, and they've been educated on these kind of fundamental things from a very early age. So yes, the questions have come, but I think because I've been aware of what's coming, I've been able to set them up of a foundation of security before that question has come.
Yes. Okay, I see. And if I go back a bit, is it, I know I don't know if it's a personal question, but were your children like planned when you decided you want to have kids?
So I was married. They were planned in terms of I would like to have children one day, but in terms of the exact date and time, not so much.
Okay, and probably you never thought about like you're gonna get divorced. So you had
No,
this view of like being a perfect family.
totally. And there's so much grief wrapped up in that as a parent, and for the children, but as a parent, you when you have your child, whether you plan them or not, at some stage you probably imagined yourself being a mother or being a father if you've ended up in
Mm,
that position. And you have this dream of what kind of mum you'll be, what kind of dad you'll be, what kind of home you'll live in, what kind of family unit you'll have, whether they'll have siblings, whether they won't have siblings. Just so much of the grief around a separation, I feel, is wrapped up in the dream of what you really want for your child. And so much of our culture is also wrapped up in what that dream is, and how that's absolutely the best thing for the child, and you must do everything to stay together for the child, and you must really make it work. And there's a huge sense of failure and letting yourself or letting your children down, that you haven't been able to make the marriage work, and somehow that your children have now got a second rate experience compared to other children, which is a horrible, horrible feeling. Because like most other mums, in fact probably every other mum, when I gave birth to my children and they were so small and sweet and I held them in my arms and I looked at them, I didn't dream that they would, get through and survive and be okay. I dreamt that they would absolutely thrive, that they would absolutely feel loved and cherished and have the best and have all the opportunities. And part of that for me was like this vision of this perfect family unit. And then for them to not have that felt huge for me. And there's a big
mm.
process of grief and coming to a place of acceptance around that.
Yeah, I can imagine like having this feeling of failure because you thought that something should happen and you imagined it for so long, and because you feel responsible for your children now.
Yeah.
And I wanted to bring the focus a bit about yourself and how did you manage to go through this grieving process of becoming a single mom and having two little children? Because even now, when I have like my guests, when I have moms that are with in a perfect relationship, it's such a difficult transition from a woman to a mom.
Mm.
So I can just imagine.
Yeah, it's don't go it alone, basically. Get yourself some therapy. If you want to support your children through that healing journey, you've got to heal yourself. Your children are going to bring up a lot of triggering stuff. They are going to say stuff about your co-parent. They're just going to have times where they want to be with you more than your co-parent. They're going to have times where they want to be with the co-parent more than you. They're figuring all of this stuff out. And as a mum, I felt it was my job to be able to be a secure container for my children's feelings, whatever that is, and whatever they're working out about the divorce. But I absolutely could not be that if I haven't figured my own stuff out before. So I can come into a relationship with them and be able to hold them where they're at and not feel triggered myself. So my absolute number one thing was got myself some therapy, got
Mm.
myself surrounded and connected with people who love me and who are willing to support me and to support the children just by being in their life and being a really a present person, someone that when they are there, they don't need to be there all the time, but if they come and visit us once a month or we go and visit them, they're present with the kids, they're there with the kids, and other times they can be present with me. So it was really about being strategic about building my support network and the children's support network to ensure that I had enough emotional, mental capacity to meet their needs in a really deep way, in a way that they felt held and not worried about me in any way.
Yeah, I would say, just like as a fellow psychologist, it's so good to be aware that you can ask for help and actually know that it is your responsibility to ask for help and to get better, especially when you're responsible for people. But there is the stigma around. I know, like, it's different in cultures and countries, but there is this stigma, like asking for help, especially for new moms to ask for help.
Mm,
It's such a
mm,
difficult thing. What do you
mm,
think?
mm. Yeah, I think there's totally a stigma, and um, it can be really hard to put yourself out there and ask for that help, because there's this whole thing, if I'm not doing it all myself, and that's because I'm not a good enough mom or I can't cope. If I'm not cooking every single meal, keeping the house spotless, making sure the children are perfectly turned out, attending to their every need, then I'm not good enough and I'm
Mhm.
not okay. But actually, there's some stuff that just has to give. And for me, that isn't my children's mental or emotional well-being. And if it isn't theirs, then it also can't be mine. It can't be my mental and emotional well-being, because I can't pour from an empty cup, essentially. If my emotional energy is completely drained, then I have nothing to pour into my children. So self-care is, in a way, childcare too. It's part of looking after my children. And if that means I get a friend around to help me do some stuff in the house, or whatever it is, help me with the stuff that doesn't feel as important to me. And I'm very fortunate to have a network of wonderful people and supportive people around me. Then I guess it's about picking your priorities and just focusing on those.
Yes, I definitely agree. And I wanted to ask you, did you had any friends that were divorced as well, or like going through similar experience?
I did not, no. So I got married really young, when I was 26. And so that I was probably one of the first to get married
Okay.
within my friendship group, and the first to get divorced. No one else around me was divorced. And that felt really, really lonely, actually, because not having a community of people around me that got it felt difficult. Because although, you know, everyone was so wonderful, so empathetic, so caring, there's something about sitting with another person that has been in your shoes, or is going through it too, and that actually you don't need to say much. They just get it. And it's therapeutic in a way, without actually going to therapy. So yeah, that was actually a really difficult thing for me.
Yeah, I asked because a lot of like new parents are usually saying to me that they felt most like understood when someone else was experiencing the same. Not even
Mm,
therapy, not anything. It's just like having the knowledge that you're not alone and you're normal within your situation because you're not alone
mm.
really helps them.
Yeah, that normalizing thing. And especially when, if you are the only divorced parent and you've got all of this cultural stuff around, well, divorce isn't good for children and that's not good enough and that's not your dream. And then everyone else around you is living that life, that whole comparison thing starts to play in. And actually having someone who's in it with you normalizes it. You're both going
Yeah.
through it together is It's really powerful.
And I wanted to ask you as a therapist now, would you say that a lot of women who have been through divorce have maternal mental health issues as well?
I think the two main things I see in women who are divorcing are anxiety and depression. But
Hmm.
to be honest, I would say it's probably very rare for someone going through a divorce to not feel some degree of anxiety and depression, because it is a huge life change. Everything feels uncertain, feels out of your control. It's this the grief, there's everything like that. And whether they were feeling anxiety and depression before, I haven't looked at making any correlations there, but certainly during the divorce and for a period after, and for that kind of stabilization period, let me find my foundations again and go through this grief process. Anxiety and depression are present throughout most people, I'd say.
Yeah. Um, and also, would you say that a lot of women are actually, like, not only women, but like men and women are struggling to actually get the decision to get divorced because they think that they should continue fighting for this marriage because of their children?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I think that's still a huge thing. And it comes from such a place of love for their children and absolutely wanting the best for their children, and so not wanting the uncertainty of what the other thing might be. You know, we can really know the, let's call it like the familiar hell. We can know the familiarity, better the devil you know kind of situation. I know this is hard. It doesn't feel right, doesn't feel perfect, but the other thing, I don't even know what that'll feel like. And I don't even know what life would be like. I don't know what my financial situation would be. I don't know how the children would cope. I don't know how I would cope. I don't know so much stuff about it. And all of these things will directly affect my children and affect me. So actually it feels far safer to just stick with what we've got here.
Yeah, and this is when the crisis comes, when you
Mm,
actually don't have a strategy for what's coming next, like a mental
mm,
strategy. And when you
yeah.
have to do it and be out there on your in yourself and you don't have the strategy, this is when the crisis comes, but you have children to take care of.
Mm, mm. Yeah,
Like,
absolutely. And I think one of the turning points for me in my journey through the divorce was, so we decided we'd get a divorce. I moved out of our marital home while it was being sold, and I moved into my parents' house with my children. And every night I felt so anxious. I couldn't sleep. I was just worried about how this was going to affect the children. I didn't know how I was going to make it okay, even though, I knew a lot about psychology. It was the overwhelm of the uncertainty. It's the, what you referred to, the not having a plan. And I remember vividly one night getting up. It was very cold. Everyone else was asleep. I couldn't sleep. I went downstairs. I sat on this really hard wooden bench we had, and I just looked out the window into the dark night, and I just felt that pit of despair in my tummy, just the overwhelming anxiety. How was I going to make this okay for the children? I went back upstairs, and I often go into my children's bedrooms while they're sleeping. I think they look so sweet, and I say goodnight to them while they're sleeping, tell them different things that I love about them, affirm them in different ways. And I switched my son's, he has these little kind of like star glow lights on around his bed. I switched them on, and his little face was lit up, and his cover was pulled right up to his chin, and he just looks so sweet and so innocent. And it was in that moment that I was really struck by his vulnerability and how dependent he was, and my daughter was, on me getting this right. Their mental and emotional health was dependent on me getting it right. And I was, the heaviness and the anxiety, I just silently cried looking at him. And it was in that moment I promised him and I promised my daughter that all of those studies linking children having a poorer quality of well-being when their parents get divorced was not going to be his story, and it was not going to be my daughter's story. And I went back to bed, but I went back to bed with a fire in my tummy. And when I woke up, that was it. That was go time. And I was making a plan. And I pulled together everything I knew as a therapist. I did additional training on child brain development, attachment theory, and pulled together a 7-step program of how I was going to ensure that they were going to thrive. And that basically gave me a game plan. It matched up kind of what I was talking about at the beginning of the episode, matched up my care, my deep, deep care with knowledge. And that together, I feel, is transformative, because you can have so much care, but if you don't know how to do the thing that you want to do, it turns into anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
But if you match the care with the knowledge, you've then got a plan and you've got huge motivation to make something positive come of it. So I pulled that 7-step framework together, and my children are thriving because I've been able to put all of the foundational blocks in place that they need to ensure that they're secure. And I've rolled this out with my clients too. And the transformation in their children, and actually the transformation in them as a person, because they're no longer consumed by the anxiety, the uncertainty, and the not knowing. They now know, right, I've got to do this. I have the care. Now I have the knowledge, and I'm going to go for it. And it's so settling.
Amazing. Thank you for the story, by the way. I wanted to ask, why would you say there are a lot of studies saying that, oh, like you have the knowledge now? Why are there so many studies saying that children are not thriving?
I think because very little people have access to the knowledge. I don't think it's a lack of care on the parents' part. I think parents care deeply
Mm-hmm.
about their children. They're deeply invested in their children thriving, but they haven't got the knowledge of how to actually put things in place that are going to ensure their children thrive. And they're often so consumed by anxiety themselves that so much of their emotional capacity is used up on that anxiety, on that worry. I don't know if you've ever been in the position where, you're playing with your child, but actually mentally you're somewhere else. Mentally you're off worrying. Mentally you're off
Mm-hmm.
like thinking about all this stuff that you're anxious about, and you're playing, you're there physically, but mentally you're somewhere else. And during divorce, our children need us to be mentally present. They need us to be attuned to them. And if we're busy worrying about lots of other things that feel out of our control, including how am I going to make them okay, we have so much less emotional capacity to attune to them and to be mentally present.
Yeah. Do you think also that this happens even when like people are not divorced, only because they're really anxious becoming a parent and they're not prepared? I don't think there is a prepared moment overall,
Yeah.
but
Oh, how do you get prepared? I think totally. I think anxiety is rife within our culture, and especially, as you've mentioned a few times, with new mums. There is no way to be fully prepared for the unknown and for the reality of what living it is actually like. You could read all the books that you want, but until you're living it and you're doing it and you're having to apply it and find your way in a way that works for you, in a way that works for your child, because you're individuals. You're not robots and do X plus Y and that will equal Z. You've got to find what works for you as a person. And it's similar when going through divorce. There are the kind of framework I pulled together are based on fundamental needs that all children have, in fact, all human beings have. But then there's also an element that I feel you get through therapy and exploring yourself as an individual and exploring who your children are, that actually, how do I meet my children, my individual child's needs. What is my child about? An example could be, uh, we might have a mum who is extroverted, so she gets more energized by being around people. They're divorcing, she's feeling overwhelmed, and in order to soothe herself, she's like, right, I'm going to book us up with play dates, I'm going to make sure we're seeing people. That is going to help me cope. Whereas her child is actually introverted and feels drained by being around people all the time. And so whilst mum is putting this thing in place to help them be able to cope, she's not realizing, not because she doesn't care, but just because it takes a lot of exploring to fully
Yeah.
understand our child, that her child is becoming more and more and more drained. And whilst all of this stuff is going on, her child needs potentially even more space because they're feeling under stress and they're feeling anxiety with changes that are happening in the home and within the family unit. And it's understanding subtle dynamics like that. And I work with mums quite often to understand, well, who actually is my child? And who actually am I? And what are our similarities and what are our differences? And how do I support my child in both of those things?
Yeah, that sounds pretty reasonable, and I think it's valid for every parent, but definitely
Totally.
for someone that doesn't have the support that they've imagined they have. Um,
Mm-hmm.
have you ever spoken also to divorced dads, like single dads?
Yeah, absolutely. So I work one on one with dads. It's
Okay.
it's a similar story. We're all human beings, and we have similar drives, and care deeply for our children. Want our children to be okay. We're feeling anxious, whether we are a male or a female, about life changing and what that's going to look like for us, and what that's going to look like for our children. So amongst the two groups, I'd say the underlying feelings under all
Yeah.
of it it's the same.
And what would you say is different between the
Hmm.
two genders?
I think there's still this cultural difference,
Yeah.
in terms of, and it depends on the age of the child. So in terms of attachment, a child is going to be more attached to the mother when
Hmm.
they're very young. If you've still got a breastfeeding child, they're going to
Yeah.
be more attached to the mum. And that's a whole separate thing for dad to process and dad to grieve. And it's a whole other pressure on mum because I'm still breastfeeding and I'm going through all of this stuff and all of this change. And how do we make sure our child has a bond with both of us, but is is also securely attached to me because that's what they need at this stage of their development. So I think there's an age thing that comes in and that can create differences, but there's also this cultural difference
Mhm.
of dads maybe being expected to take a back seat,
Yeah.
and mum to run the show. And in some ways, for some people that will work, and for other people that won't work. And again, that's coming back to the individuals that are involved in the situation. Who is dad, who is mum, if we were talking in like a straight couples, who is dad, who is mum, who are the children, what are the children's needs. And that's when it can feel slightly overwhelming, and that's when I would work with individuals on actually personality prototyping and actually looking at exploring who am I, who are they, what do our children need, what do they get from me, what do they get from their other parent, and how can we ensure that we are giving them as much of what they need from the different attributes that we both hold. So even though you split and there might be lots of animosity and there might be lots of hurt, there is still a way to work together strategically for your children.
Yeah, I guess it really depends also, like, how did you split? But most of the times, people are mainly looking after their children, so they would put everything behind them. um, I'm curious to ask you also because of following back the conversation about stigma, going to therapy, etc.
Mm.
Would you say that people are going to therapy for that? Because this is a really specific period of your life where you feel vulnerable, and also the stigma around asking for help when you're a new parent. Would you say that they're getting to you later than they should?
I think leading up to a divorce, and during a divorce, there's this really reflective period where you're reflecting on what worked for you in the relationship and what didn't work for you. You're feeling incredibly hurt and upset that the dream didn't become the reality. And you're trying to figure out why. Why? Because I don't want this to happen again. Why did this happen? Is that humans are so driven to find out why.
Yeah.
And often people reflect right back to the beginning of the relationship and be like, oh, I did see that then. I thought, oh, maybe it wasn't a match, but I thought, oh no, I'm sure it'll be okay. And then there was this, and then there was that. And there'll be all these things that they start to pull out. I think ultimately therapy is amazing for any person at any stage of their life, because what we're trying to achieve through therapy is an understanding of ourselves, an understanding of what makes us tick, who we are. And the more we understand ourselves, the more we can understand another, and the more we can understand our relationship between another and to another. So, a divorce happens because a relationship has ended, and there's so much to pick apart there. And we could say, oh well, if you had therapy 20 years ago, then you would have not got married, and then you would have chosen someone else, you would have chosen something different. I think there's use in going back and figuring out what worked for you, what didn't work for you, what did you overlook, what did you bring to the party, what did they bring to the party. There's use in that in order to step forward into something that is going to work for you. But in terms of, should you got therapy before? I think everyone should have therapy from, like, here's your 18th birthday and here's some therapy. Go and figure out who you are, the beautiful human, amazing, all your quirks, go and figure it out. But sadly, many of us, or the majority of people, wouldn't have that opportunity.
Yeah, I started to think about that because there is a lot of like cultural differences, of course. And speaking from a Bulgarian perspective, people here go to therapy when they don't have a choice. Like
Mm,
when they're got to the stage where they're not functional in their life, so they have to go to therapy.
mm, mm,
And I think the best thing is to know when you feel like something's off for quite a while, but it's not to the point where you can't function and go to work and
mm,
be yourself again, but you want to prevent it to get worse. And that's why I'm telling all of the people that I know. And when it comes to parents, my observation would be, because I'm not a parent myself, but my observation to other people would be that because of the guilt that they have, that they should do everything on their own, the process of actually asking for help is much longer.
mm, mm. Yeah, totally. And it takes a certain level of self-awareness as well, which sometimes you need to go into therapy to get, to actually recognize, I'm at a point now, I'm at a crossroads where it's either going to go this way and I'm going to go really downhill, or I'm going to start to put some things into place in order to get myself to where I want to go. And often when we're trying to do it all ourselves, we don't see that it's a crossroad, and we just take that path down towards, oh, you just carry on, it's not completely broken, so don't fix it, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think it also really depends what kind of support you have, like in when it comes to your parents as well, like the grandparents.
Yeah.
how are they how are they seeing you coping with everything and being like, you should do it on on your own, or we're here for you and you should ask for help. So it really depends, this type of like, where are you coming from actually?
Yeah, and there's also something to be said around, can you get the help that you want to get? So um, people might have really loving and supportive grandparents, so their parents might be there and wanting to support them with the child. But if there can be a place where, if you have had therapy, you actually don't want to parent how your parents parented you. You want to do it differently.
Yeah.
And their support is is loving and it's well intended, but actually it's not aligned with the way that you want to parent. And that's really difficult too. It's about finding the support that is supportive of you as a parent and what your whole ethos is.
Yeah. Um, okay, because our time is coming to an end, I wanted to ask you one last question.
Mm.
What advice would you give specifically to a woman that is about to get a divorce and she's alone with her children? Like, what would you say to her?
I would say I totally get where you're at. I totally get the anxiety and all of those huge emotions that are consuming you right now. I know how much you deeply care for your children and you want to make them okay. And potentially you're just not quite sure how to do that. I will send over, for anyone in that situation, I will send over a free guide, which is the first 7 steps you need to think about in terms of creating security for your children. And they'll be included in the show notes. So I would say equip yourself with the knowledge so you can match your care with the amount of knowledge that you have. And that is a roadmap to getting to where you want to go, a place of security and peace and love for you and your children.
Thank you, Hannah. I think you're really an inspiration for people that are going through stuff like that, because it's an amazing thing to see that people can actually do it, and we all have the resources if we have the
Mm,
awareness and knowledge.
mm.
So thank you so much for sharing everything that you had now, and yeah, it was an amazing conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.